Hello friends, this is JoAnn from the Child Development Department at the Walla Walla YMCA, and today I'm going to be reading part 2 of Vacation Under the Volcano. In my last video, we left on a little bit of a cliffhanger because we didn't know what Jack and Annie were going to do next. We knew that they wanted to find a specific book at Brutus's vacation villa, but we didn't know how they were going to find the villa. We didn't know what was going to happen to Pompeii. So hopefully all of our questions will be answered in the following chapters. All right, so chapter 5 is called Books. Chapter 5. Jack and Annie ran up to the front entrance of the villa. Jack pushed the door open. "Go in, hurry," said Annie. They slipped into the main hall. "Hello," Annie called. There was no answer. The place seemed empty. The main hall had a large opening in the ceiling. Below it was a small stone pool filled with water. Jack looked at it carefully. "Oh, I bet rain comes through the hole," said Jack. "Then it lands in the pool so they can use it for their water." He started to take out his notebook to take a note. "There's no time, Jack," said Annie. "We have to look in all the rooms for books." Okay, calm down," said Jack. He put away his notebook and followed Annie. Books, she said, peering into a room off into the hall. She moved to the next room. Books. Then she moved on to the next. Jack trailed behind her. Even though she had already checked the rooms, he took a quick peek in each of them. He wanted to see what a house in Roman times looked like. He'd write notes about it later. The first 2 rooms had wooden beds. The walls had pictures painted on them. The floors were covered with tiny pieces of colored stone. The 3rd room had a low table with silver dishes on it. 3 sloping couches were placed around the table. The couches were covered with pillows. "This must be the dining room," said Jack. People from Roman times lay down on couches while they ate. "Did you know that?" He looked around for Annie. Where was she? "Jack, come here," called Annie. Jack followed her voice. She was in a garden off the dining room. It had a stone patio, palm trees, and grapevines. In the middle was a pond with a mermaid fountain. Goldfish swam in the water. "Look, there's another room," said Annie. She moved to the door of a room off to the garden. She opened the door and peeked inside. Jack looked in with her. Along the walls of the room were long shelves with rolls of paper on them. "Rats," said Annie. "No books." She closed the door. "No books in this whole villa. Let's get out of here." "Just a minute," said Jack. "I have an idea." He pulled out his book on Roman times. He found a section called Writing. He read, "Romans used pens made of small reeds. Their ink came partly from the black ink of octopuses. They wrote their books on scrolls of papyrus paper." "Aha," said Jack. "That's a library of scrolls. I bet our ancient story is in there." Chapter 6. The end is here. Jack threw open the door to the room of the scrolls. He and Annie rushed in and ran over all of the shelves. Jack pulled out the pieces of paper with a Latin title on it, Ver Fortissimus in Mundo. "Okay," he said, "we have to find the scroll with this title." They began frantically unrolling scrolls one by one. They were all handwritten in Latin. "Here it is," said Annie. She held up a scroll. The words at the top matched the one on their paper. "Yay," said Jack. "I wish I could read Latin so I could find out what the story is." "Don't think about it now," said Annie. "Let's go." Annie handed the scroll to Jack, then started out of the room. "Come on," she said. "Bring it." "I just want to check and see what the story's about," said Jack. He put the scroll in his leather bag. Then he flipped through the book on Roman times, looking for a picture of the ancient scroll. In the middle of the book, he found a picture of a volcano erupting over a town. Under the picture was written, "For 800 years, Mount Vesuvius was a peaceful mountain rising above the town of Pompeii. Then at noon, on August 24th, AD 79, it erupted into a deadly volcano." "Oh no," whispered Jack. "August 24th, AD 79? That's today." "Oh man, what time is it?" He looked around wildly. "Annie!" She was gone again. "Annie!" Jack grabbed the leather bag. Then, clutching the book, he tore out of the scroll room. "Annie!" he cried. "What?" Annie appeared at the door to the dining room. Volcano," stuttered Jack. "What?" said Annie. It's coming. A volcano at noon," said Jack. Annie gasped. "What time is it?" cried Jack. "So that's what the soothsayer meant," said Annie. "The end is near." "What time is it?" Jack asked again. He looked around the garden. He saw something near the mermaid fountain. A sundial, he said. That's how the Romans told time. Jack and Annie reached to the sundial. What time does it say? Said Annie. I don't know, said Jack. His hand shook as he turned the pages of the book. He stopped on a picture of a sundial. It showed examples of different times. Jack looked back and forth from the page to read the sundial in the garden. Here, he said. He found the one that matched. Jack read the writing under the picture. The shadow on the sundial can hardly be seen at noon. Oh man, he whispered. He looked at Annie. The end is near. The end is here. Just then he heard a terrible blast. It was the loudest sound he had ever heard. Chapter 7. The sky is falling. The next thing Jack knew, he was lying on the stone patio. The patio stones were trembling. A rumbling sound came from the ground. Jack raised his head. Annie was on the ground too. You okay? Said Annie. Jack nodded. Everything was shaking and crashing down around them. Pots, plants, the mermaid fountain, water from the goldfish pond sloshed onto the patio and Jack and Annie. They both jumped up just as the roof tiles began falling into the garden. We better get inside, said Jack. He grabbed his leather bag. Then he and Annie stumbled into the scroll library. Giant cracks split the stone floor as Jack and Annie ran to a window and looked out. Glowing rocks were bursting through the sky above Mount Vesuvius. The whole top of the mountain had blown off. What's happening? Said Annie. I'll check, said Jack. He pulled out the Roman book. He read aloud from the section about the volcano. When a volcano erupts, hot melted rock called magma is pushed to the surface of the earth. Once it gets outside the volcano, it's called lava. Lava? That's like burning mud, said Jack. It covers everything, cried Annie. Jack kept reading. There was no running from lava from Mount Vesuvius. The magma from the volcano cooled so fast that it froze into small grayish-white rocks called pumice. A pumice rock is very light and has holes like a sponge. That doesn't sound too bad, said Annie. Wait, there's more, said Jack. He read on. A great cloud of pumice, ash, and burning rock shot miles into the air. When it rained down on Pompeii, it completely buried the town. Oh man, said Jack, this is a major disaster. It's getting dark, said Annie. Jack looked out again. A thick black cloud was spreading over the earth like an umbrella. The sun vanished as the sky turned smoky gray. That must be the cloud of pumice and ash, said Jack. Just then, the ground trembled again. Chunks of plaster from the ceiling fell on the scrolls. We have to get out of here, said Annie. They ran from the scroll library into the garden. Ash and pumice began to fall. We have to cover our heads, said Jack. They hurried from the garden into the dining room. Look, pillows, said Annie. Let's put them on our heads. They hurried to the couches beside the table and grabbed a pillow. Tie it around your head with your belt, said Jack. They both pulled off the belts from around their tunics. Then they tied on the pillows with giant hats. A chunk of ceiling crashed down near them. Let's get out of here, said Jack. They stepped over pieces of fallen roof tiles and ran into the main hall. They pushed open the front door. A blast of heat and dust nearly knocked them over, and they stepped outside. Pumice ran down from their pillow hats. Run, cried Annie. They ran from the vacation villa into the dark, burning streets. Chapter 8. Nightmare at Noon. In the distance, fire burst from Mount Vesuvius. Burning rocks and fiery ash fell from the sky. The hot, dusty air smelled like rotten eggs as Jack and Annie rushed down the street. In the forum, everyone, shoppers, soldiers, gladiators, fruit sellers, were running in every direction. Stalls had collapsed. Carts were sliding. Jack froze. He didn't know where to go. That way, shouted Annie. Jack followed her as they ran past the Temple of Jupiter. Its mighty columns had fallen, and its walls were crumbling. They ran past the public baths just as its roof caved in. Which way now? Shouted Annie. The tree house is in the olive grove, Jack said as they kept running. The olive grove and the bridge are near the street with all of those open shops, said Annie. Remember the bridge? Jack looked up at the erupting mountain. A red-hot cloud billowed over it. Fires burned on its slopes. Head in the direction of Mount Vesuvius, he said. It was behind us as we came into Pompeii. Right, cried Annie. So while others ran away from Mount Vesuvius, Jack and Annie ran toward it. On the street with the open shops, baskets and broken jars rolled over and cracked stones. Jack and Annie ran past the bakery, and the shoe shop. They ran past the butcher shop and the barber shop. All the shops were empty. Their owners had fled. The closer they got to the volcano, the more the ground trembled, the darker and dustier the air got. "This is like my nightmare," cried Annie. Jack choked on the rotten fumes. His eyes watered. "Look, the olive grove," shouted Annie. "The treehouse is just over there. Come on." Jack could hardly see, but he followed Annie. They left the street and ran to the dried-up stream near the grove. "Where's the bridge?" cried Annie. They looked around wildly. The bridge had vanished. Chapter 9. Save us! "The bridge must have caved in," cried Annie. They stared at the dried-up stream. Pumice had piled up in huge drifts like snow. "We'll have to get through that stuff to get across," said Jack. He and Annie slid down the bank onto piles of pumice. As they started to move across it, more and more fell. Jack tried to move the millions of warm, grayish-white pebbles, but he was trapped. "I'm stuck," cried Annie. "Me too," said Jack. "Remember what Morgan said," said Annie. At that moment, Jack couldn't remember anything. He was too tired and dazed. "In your darkest hour, only the ancient story can save you," cried Annie. "Where's your bag?" Jack lifted his bag into the air. Above the sea of pumice, Annie grabbed it and pulled out the ancient scroll. She held it up to the dark sky. "Save us, story!" she shouted. Jack felt himself sink deeper and deeper into the pumice. Suddenly, he heard a deep voice say, "Rise, son." Then someone lifted Jack up into the air. A great flash of fire lit the dusty darkness. In the red light, Jack saw the biggest, strongest man he'd ever seen in his life. The man looked like a gladiator, but even bigger than the ones he had seen earlier. He held Jack with one hand and Annie with the other. He placed them both on the outer bank of the stream. "Run," the giant gladiator boomed, "before it's too late." Jack and Annie didn't stop to ask any questions. Together they charged through the olive grove. They jumped over fallen branches. They leaped over great cracks in the earth. Finally, they came into the tree with the magic treehouse. They grabbed the rope ladder and scrambled up to the treehouse. "Where's the Pennsylvania book?" Jack shouted. He was too blinded by ash and dust to find the book that always took them home. "I've got it," cried Annie. "I wish we could go there." Jack felt the treehouse start to spin. It spun faster and faster, and then everything was still. Absolutely, wonderfully, peacefully still. Chapter 10. A simple explanation. Jack didn't move. He had never been so tired in all his life. "Breathe," said Annie. Jack gulped in cool, clean air. He opened his eyes. He couldn't see a thing. "Take off your glasses," said Annie. "They're filthy." Jack took off his glasses. The first thing he saw was his backpack. The white tunics and lace-up sandals were gone. So were their pillow hats and their leather bag. Jack let out a long, deep breath as he cleaned his glasses on his shirt. A voice came from behind him. "I'm very glad to see you safe and sound." Morgan Le Fay stood in the corner of the treehouse. She looked as lovely and mysterious as ever. "Happy to be home?" she asked. Jack nodded. The sound of the erupting volcano still echoed in his ears. It was pretty scary," he said in a hoarse voice. "I know, but you were truly brave," said Morgan. "You witnessed a famous event in history. Nowadays, scientists study the remains of Pompeii to find out more about Roman times." "I feel bad for all of those people," said Annie. "Yes," said Morgan, "but most of the people of Pompeii did escape. The city wasn't completely buried by ash until the next day." "We were almost trapped," said Annie, "though we asked the ancient story to save us. Then a huge gladiator helped us." Jack reached into his pack. He breathed a sigh of relief. The scroll was still there. He took it out. It was covered with dust and ashes. "Here's the story," said Jack. He handed it to Morgan. "I'm deeply grateful," she said softly. "You risked everything to bring this to me. I can never thank you enough." "Don't worry about it," said Jack. He didn't want Morgan to know how scared he had been. "Yeah, no problem," said Annie. Morgan smiled. "You are amazing, Master Librarian," she said. "Do you think you're up to rescuing another ancient story?" "Yes," said Annie. "Now?" said Jack. Actually, he was a little tired now. Morgan laughed. "No, take a nice vacation. Come back 2 weeks from today. Then you will take a trip to ancient China," she said. "Ancient China? Wow," said Annie. "Oh man," said Jack. "Go home now and rest," said Morgan. She handed Jack his pack. "Thanks," he said. "Bye." "Bye," said Annie. Morgan gave them a little wave. Then Annie and Jack left the treehouse and headed down the rope ladder. When he reached the ground, Jack looked up. "Morgan," he called, "what is that story about? The one we just rescued?" "It's called The Strongest Man in the World," said Morgan. "It's a lost tale about Hercules." "Hercules," said Jack. "Yes, he was one of the heroes of the Greeks and the Romans," said Morgan. "He was the son of Jupiter." "Oh, wow, now I get it," said Annie. "I'm taking it back now to Camelot's library," said Morgan. "Everyone will be so excited to read it thanks to you." She waved to them. "Goodbye for now." As she waved, the wind began to whirl. The treehouse began to spin. In a blur of shadow and light, Morgan and the magic treehouse were gone. Jack and Annie started walking through the woods. "Get it? Get it?" said Annie. "Get what?" said Jack. "We were saved by Hercules," said Annie. "We asked the story to save us, and Hercules appeared." "That's not possible," said Jack. "It was just some gladiator guy. The story of Hercules is a myth. That means he never really lived." They left the woods and started up their street. "I know it's a myth," said Annie, "but I have a simple explanation." "What?" said Jack. "Hercules is a myth to people in this time," said Annie, "but in Roman times, lots of people believed he was real. So, since we were in Roman times, he was real to us." "I don't know," said Jack. "Did you ever hear the saying," said Annie, "when in Rome, do as the Romans do?" Jack laughed. "Yeah." He looked up at the sky. "Thanks, Hercules," he said softly, "wherever you are." "Jack! Annie!" their dad called from their front porch. "It's time to go." "Oh, brother, I forgot," said Jack. "Yeah, I hope nothing exciting happens on our vacation," said Annie. "Yeah," said Jack. "I hope it's really, really boring." "Hurry," their dad said. "Coming," they called. Then they took off running for home and a restful vacation. Well, that was the end of Vacation Under the Volcano. I'm really glad that Jack and Annie were able to escape safely, and they were able to get the book for Morgan.